The first thing you notice about the Nightshade Club after midnight isn't the sound, but the silence beneath it. The bass drum was expected, a tangible presence in the air that vibrated through the soles of your shoes. The laughter, the clink of glasses, the soft murmur of countless conversations, these were surface sounds. But beneath them, in the space between the notes, was a watchful, calculating silence. The silence of wealth, power, and secrets passed without a word. I moved through it all like a shadow in uniform, a crisp white shirt, black vest, a bow tie that felt more like a noose after a long shift. My name is Emma Blake, and for the last 3 years, this velvet-clad cage has been my world. I poured whiskey for men who called each other sir while their eyes promised violence. I served champagne to women whose smiles were as sharp and cold as the diamonds at their throats. I was invisible, and that was the only thing keeping me safe. Tonight, the silence felt different, heavier. It started the moment Damien Ryker walked in. No need to clear a path, the crowd parted instinctively, a sea yielding to a predator. I didn't need to hear the whispered names to know who he was. Everyone in the city knew. His reputation was a long, dark shadow, and tonight it had fallen across my bar. He was taller than I expected, built like a cliff face, solid, unyielding. His hair was dark, silver at the temples, and his suit was tailored to perfection, worth more than my entire education. But it was his eyes that froze me, a pale, chilling gray, like the sky just before a storm. They swept across the room, not with curiosity, but with ownership. For a moment, they met mine. I dropped my gaze, heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I focused on polishing a glass, the motion a desperate anchor. Don't look up. Don't attract attention. Be the ghost. His entourage settled into a booth, a nest of black suits and watchful eyes. But he didn't sit. He detached himself and walked toward the bar. My bar. Each step on the polished marble felt like a countdown. The space around me emptied as other patrons subtly found reasons to be elsewhere. I was ground zero. Whiskey, he said, his voice low, a rumble that bypassed my ears and vibrated straight into my bones. The finest, neat. I nodded, throat too tight for words. I turned, reaching for the finest bottle we had, my hands shaking. I could feel his gaze on me, unsettling, heavy. As I poured the amber liquid into a crystal tumbler, a man slid onto the stool beside him. He was younger, slick, with a nervous energy. Jonas, he said, with a too loud voice. Damien, a pleasure as always. Let me get that for you. Before I could react, Jonas reached over the bar, took the glass I had just poured, and set it in front of Ryker. Then, with a flourish that made my skin crawl, he pulled out a small unlabeled bottle. A gift, he whispered, too eager. From a new shipment. The purest you'll ever taste. A special blend just for you. He poured a drop into the whiskey. It vanished without a trace. Every instinct screamed that something was terribly wrong. Marco's eagerness, the secretive bottle, it all felt like a script from a nightmare I knew far too well. Ryker's eyes flickered over the glass, unreadable. He reached for it. Time slowed, then shattered. My father's face flashed in my mind, his voice a ghost from the past. Never get involved, Emma. See something, look the other way. Survive. But I hadn't learned to look the other way, not when it meant turning a blind eye to murder. I moved before my mind could catch up. On a pristine cocktail napkin, I wrote 5 words with trembling fingers. The pen felt like a weapon. I slid the napkin across the polished wood of the bar, watching as it slid to a stop beside his untouched glass. Don't drink it. Smile and leave now. I didn't look at him. I just turned and busied myself with the sink, pretending to wash a glass. My whole body braced for what might happen next. The silence stretched behind me, tense and unnerving. I could feel Ryker's gaze shift from the napkin to me. A soft rustle of paper as he picked it up. A second passed. Then another. Had he read it? Would he listen? Suddenly, a hand shot out. Not to grab the glass, but to pin my wrist to the bar. His grip was strong, not brutal, but absolute, I gasped, my head snapping up to meet his cold gray eyes. There was no anger in them, no surprise, just an unsettling intensity, as if he were seeing me for the first time. And he was memorizing every single detail. His voice was barely a whisper, meant only for me, as his thumb brushed against the frantic pulse point in my wrist. "Why," he murmured, his voice low and dangerous, "would I do that, little ghost?" He hadn't drunk the whiskey. He hadn't left. He had grabbed me instead. And in that moment, I knew, with terrifying clarity, that my life of invisibility was over. The world narrowed to the points of contact. The cold, hard bar beneath my arm, the burning heat of his grip on my wrist, the intensity of his gaze. My heart wasn't just pounding, it felt like it was trying to claw its way out of my chest. Every survival instinct screamed at me to pull away, to flee, to scream for help, but I was frozen. I don't know what you mean, I stammered, the lie hanging on my lips, thin and fragile. I tried to pull my wrist back, but his grip tightened infinitesimally, a quiet, effortless reminder of his control. It wasn't painful yet, but it could be. "The note," he said, his voice still low, a private rumble among the club's noise. His eyes flicked down to my wrist, then back up to my face. "Explain." He hadn't acknowledged the poisoned glass. He hadn't glanced at Marco. His entire focus was on me, and that was more terrifying than any overt threat. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Marco's smug smile falter, then confusion and panic. Ryker was paying no attention to him now. "Leave us," Ryker said, his voice like ice. Marco opened his mouth to protest, but one of the men from the booth, a mountain of muscle with a scar across his brow, took a single step forward. Marco paid, nodded, and quickly disappeared into the crowd without another word. We were alone again, an island of terrifying quiet in a sea of music and laughter. "You have 5 seconds, Ryker said, his thumb stroking slowly over my pounding pulse. His gesture was intimate, possessive, and utterly chilling. "Who are you, Emma?" "I just work here," I whispered, trying to keep the lie in place. "That is not who you are. That is where you are." He leaned in closer, his voice dropping further. "You saw something. You acted. People who just work here do not do that. They look away. So, I will ask again, who are you, and what did you see?" The truth was a dangerous thing. A lie would mean a death sentence. His eyes demanded it, absolute, unyielding. "Marco," I breathed out, my voice trembling. It wasn't right. He was too eager. He intercepted your drink. It's a classic play. One of his eyes was too bright, like a man who knew something. A plan. Ryker's eyebrow arched almost imperceptibly. "A classic play," he repeated, savoring the words. "You seem familiar with the genre." He finally released my wrist, but the warmth of his grip lingered on my skin, a burning reminder of his control. My fingers instinctively brushed the spot, still feeling his touch. "We need to leave," I said, finding a small sliver of courage. If Marco realized it hadn't worked, if he knew the poison didn't take, it would drive him into a panic. And panic makes people stupid. Stupid people are easy to track. Ryker's logic was cold, brutal, and utterly confident. He picked up the napkin I had written on, folded it neatly with one hand, and tucked it into his inner suit pocket. The gesture felt strangely final, like a contract being sealed. "You're coming with me," he said, his voice firm, a decree more than a question. "I can't. My shift isn't over." "Your shift," he interrupted, his tone leaving no room for argument, "is over permanently. You do not work here anymore. Get your things now." The finality in his voice was a command I couldn't defy. I nodded numbly, mind racing. My bag, everything I owned, was in the staff locker room. My phone, my keys, my life, all in that bag. To get it, I'd have to walk away from him. Have a moment alone. Was this a test? Would I run? I glanced at him again, and a cold certainty gripped my chest. Running would be the last mistake I ever made. I knew he'd find me, and he would not be kind the second time around. I turned and walked toward the staff door on unsteady legs, feeling his gaze burn into my back with every step. The locker room was a stark contrast to the club's opulence: fluorescent lights, chipped linoleum floors, the smell of stale perfume and bleach. My hands shook so badly I could barely work the combination lock. Sophia, another bartender, said as she slipped out of her heels. "Hey, are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." A hysterical laugh bubbled up in my throat. I felt like one. "I'm fine. Just not feeling well. I'm leaving." I shoved my apron into the locker, grabbed my worn leather bag, and slung it over my shoulder. It held everything I owned that mattered. Just like always, some things never change. Wait, what did Ryker want? Everyone's talking about it. He grabbed you. Her eyes were wide, a mix of fear and morbid curiosity. Nothing. A misunderstanding, I lied, voice hollow. I have to go. I pushed through the door, back into the hallway, half expecting this whole thing to be a cruel joke. To find the club empty, and for this to be some nightmare I'd wake up from. But there he was, waiting, Ryker, flanked by two men. One was the mountain with the scar, the other a younger, leaner man with cold, calculating eyes. They looked at me, not as a person, but as an asset, a package, or a problem. "This way," Ryker gestured, leading me toward a service exit, the kind I only ever used to take out the trash. The cold night air hit me like a slap as the door swung open onto a dimly lit alley. It smelled of damp concrete and rotting garbage. And parked right there, its engine purring softly, was a black Rolls-Royce Cullinan. The back door swung open automatically. "Get in," Ryker ordered. There was no choice. The alley, or the car. The unknown, or the man who now held my life in his hands. I took a breath, the last free breath I feared I would ever take, and climbed into the opulent, leather-scented darkness. Ryker slid in beside me, his large frame taking up an immense amount of space. The two other men got in the front, and the doors closed with a soft, definitive thud, locking me in. The car pulled away from the curb in unnerving silence. I stared out the tinted window, watching my old life, the club, the lights, the ordinary danger I understood, disappear into the night. I was trapped in a gilded cage on wheels. "Where are you taking me?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Somewhere secure," Ryker replied, not looking at me. He was typing something on his phone, his attention elsewhere. "Where can we talk?" I pressed, my voice smaller now. "I told you what I saw." He finally turned his head, his gray eyes meeting mine in the dim light. "No, you didn't," he said, his voice serious, deliberate. "What you told me is just the beginning of what you know. You recognized a classic play. You risked your neck for a stranger. That's a story I want to hear." His words hung in the air like an invitation, but it felt more like a demand than an offer. He leaned back, the leather creaking softly under his weight. "Start from the beginning," he added. "Not tonight's beginning. The real one. The beginning." I stared at him, a knot forming in my stomach. The beginning? The first time I heard a gunshot and didn't flinch? The first time I packed a bag in the middle of the night? The day they lowered my father into the ground? I couldn't tell him that the truth was a landmine, and every step could trigger an explosion. "There is no story," I said, my voice quiet as I turned to look out the window at the blur of sleeping city streets. "I'm a bartender. I watch people. It's my job to know when someone is lying, when they're nervous, when they're about to do something stupid." Ryker was silent for a moment, his gaze unblinking as he studied me. "Your friend, Marco," I continued, my voice low, "was all three." His hands were shaking. His pupils were dilated. He was performing, but badly. The special bottle? It was a prop. It was a performance I've seen before. I glanced at him, watching his expression for any sign of reaction. His eyes were cold, but there was something else there too, a flicker of something akin to curiosity. Your father, Ryker said softly, his voice like a rumble. Where is he now? I clenched my jaw, fighting the knot in my throat. He's dead, I said flatly. His business partner saw to that. The words came out like stones, final and cold. Ryker's gaze sharpened, though his face remained unreadable. This at least was not a lie, I whispered, my voice barely audible. It just wasn't the whole truth. The silence in the car felt suffocating. The weight of my father's death hung in the air, but I didn't dare speak more. Ryker was a man who dealt in facts. Lies would get me nowhere. You understand the nature of this world, Ryker said, breaking the silence with a statement, not a question. It wasn't a question, but I still responded, my voice soft, I know. Loyalty is a currency. Betrayal is the tax on power. The car had long since left the bright lights of downtown, now weaving through the darker streets of the city. We approached a private underground garage, and as the gate slid closed behind us, I realized just how isolated I had become. It felt like a world apart from everything I had known. The garage was pristine, lit by harsh fluorescent lights, and housed a few sleek cars that looked more like pieces of art than vehicles. This wasn't a home, it was a secure location, a bunker disguised as luxury. The scarred man, who Ryker referred to as Kale, got out first. His eyes scanned the area before he opened my door. Alexei, the leaner man with cold eyes, stayed close, his hand resting near his waist, where I was certain a weapon was concealed. They led me to a private elevator that required a keycard and biometric scan to use. The doors slid open, and the elevator ascended smoothly to a penthouse far above the city. When the doors opened, my breath caught. The view was breathtaking, floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city skyline, stretching out into the dark lake beyond. The interior was all polished concrete floors, low-slung leather furniture, and stark white walls adorned with a few pieces of brutalist art. It was powerful, masculine, and utterly soulless. It fit him perfectly. You will stay here tonight, Ryker said, shrugging off his jacket and draping it over the back of a chair. He walked to a bar cart, far more elegant than the one I'd worked behind. He poured 2 fingers of amber liquid into a glass, but didn't offer me one. Kale will remain outside the door. Do not attempt to leave. The command was absolute. He was treating me like a prisoner, but a prisoner in a 5-star cell. You can't keep me here, I said, my voice filled with defiance I didn't entirely feel. I can, and I am, Ryker replied, his tone even, unwavering. You interfered in a matter you don't understand. That act made you a part of it. Until I know who Marco was working for and what they intended, you are a material witness and a potential target. A target? I whispered, the words a cold stone sinking into my stomach. Ryker gave a nod, his eyes locking on mine. They saw you. They saw you speak to me. They saw me take you. If they are competent, they already know your name, your address. The finality in his words sent a chill through me. My apartment, my small, shabby refuge, was no longer safe. My neighbors would be oblivious, but I couldn't afford to go back there. I had become untethered. Jobless, homeless, and now trapped in the penthouse of a man whose reputation was the stuff of nightmares. This is insane, I whispered, wrapping my arms around myself. I was just trying to do the right thing. The right thing, he repeated, a flicker of amusement in his eyes. A dangerous habit. He finished his drink and set the glass down with a soft click. There is a guest room down the hall to the right. It has everything you need. We'll continue this in the morning. He turned and walked into the suite without another word, leaving me standing alone in the vast, silent room. I wandered through the penthouse, feeling the weight of my new reality pressed down on me. The space was both beautiful and cold, a gilded cage that trapped me in luxury. The view from the windows was breathtaking, but the city below felt so far away, almost unreachable. I finally found the guest room. It was immaculate, like a hotel suite, with a king-sized bed, an ensuite bathroom with marble tiles, and a walk-in closet that was empty except for a plush robe. It was impersonal, perfect. It was everything a room should be, except it wasn't mine. I sat on the edge of the bed, still holding my bag like a lifeline. My heart was racing, my mind spinning. My life had just been upended in a matter of hours, and all I could do was sit there in silence, unable to move forward or go back. I pulled out my phone, but of course, there was no service. I was completely cut off from the world I once knew. My friend Chloe, she would be worried. We had plans for brunch tomorrow. She'd text me, call me, maybe even show up at my apartment. What would I tell her? That I'd been kidnapped by a mafia boss? It sounded like the plot of a bad movie. But it was real. Marco's panicked eyes, Ryker's iron grip on my wrist, and the cold finality of this place, they were all real. I lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of it all. The silence of the room was oppressive, every creak, every hum of the building making me jump. My mind raced through escape plans, but I quickly discarded them. Where would I go? I had a few $100s in cash, maxed out credit cards, and a bank account that barely had enough to cover my rent. I was, for all intents and purposes, already his. The sun was beginning to tinge the sky with a pale, sickly light when I heard a soft knock on the door. I jolted upright, heart in my throat. Yes? The door opened, and Cale stood there, his massive frame filling the doorway. He held a stack of folded clothing in his hands. Boss thought you might want a change of clothes, he said, his voice low and gravelly. He placed them on the chair just inside the door. Breakfast is in 30 minutes. And then he left, closing the door behind him. I stared at the clothes, a simple pair of dark jeans, a soft cashmere sweater, and undergarments, all in my size. The efficiency of it made my skin crawl. He hadn't just guessed. He'd had someone find out. When I emerged, showered and dressed, I felt like I was wearing someone else's skin. The clothes were soft, expensive, and fit perfectly, but they didn't belong to me. It was another uniform in a life I hadn't chosen. Ryker was already seated at the dining table, reading a tablet. He looked up as I entered. In the morning light, he seemed different, still dangerous, still imposing, but more real. The sharp lines of his face were softened slightly, the silver at his temples more pronounced. He was dressed casually now in dark trousers and a black sweater, and it made him seem even more dangerous, more approachable, and yet, more lethal. Sit, he said, gesturing to the chair opposite him. There was a spread of food on the table, pastries, fruit, and a carafe of coffee. My stomach churned. I poured myself a cup, just to have something to do with my hands. We've located Marco, Ryker said without preamble. I froze, the carafe hovering above my cup. What? He was found in his apartment, Ryker continued, his voice as cold as his eyes. An apparent suicide. The words hit me like ice water. Suicide? I whispered, my hand trembling as I set the carafe down. You don't believe that? I don't deal in beliefs, he replied smoothly, his tone neutral. I deal in facts. The fact is, the man who tried to poison me is dead before he could be questioned. That is not a coincidence. It is a cleanup. His words sank in, and a chill spread through my body. Whoever Marco had been working for was thorough, and they were still out there. It means whoever he was working for is still a threat, Ryker added, his eyes meeting mine. And your value to me has increased. My value? The words tasted like ash. I wasn't a person anymore. I was a tool, an asset. Ryker's gaze didn't waver. You are the only living person who was there. You saw Marco's behavior. You might have noticed something else. A detail you've forgotten. A name spoken. A text message you saw him send. A person he looked at before he approached me. I knew what he was asking. He wanted me to remember everything, even the smallest detail. He was fishing for anything that could lead him to whoever had sent Marco. Memory is a curious thing, he continued. Under the right pressure, it can yield unexpected results. I pushed the plate of food away, my appetite gone. So, I'm your consultant now? You are my guest, he corrected, his voice firm, though the word guest felt like a lie. You are a guest with a unique perspective. And until the threat is identified and neutralized, your safety is my priority. His safety was his priority. I was nothing more than a means to an end. But I couldn't ignore the small part of me that was starting to understand the game he was playing. This was no longer just about survival. It was about power, control, and the dangerous allure of belonging in a world where those who saw too much were never allowed to leave. After breakfast, Ryker stood and walked to the window, his back to me as he looked out over the city. His presence filled the room like a shadow, and for a moment, I was caught between the reality of the situation and the strange stillness of the penthouse. I have business to attend to, he said, his voice low, barely a whisper. Kale will remain. Do not attempt to contact anyone. The phone lines are monitored and the perimeter is secure. He paused at the door and looked back at me. The library is through that door. You might find it diverting. The word was a taunt, a reminder that I was still his captive, even if I had a view. I was a prisoner, but one with the luxury of freedom within these walls. I stared after him as he left, his figure disappearing down the hallway. Kale, ever watchful, remained silent by the door. I couldn't help but feel the weight of his gaze as I moved toward the library, my mind still racing from the morning's revelations. The library was 2 stories high, the walls lined with books, real books, whose leather spines were worn and smelled of history. It was the first part of the penthouse that felt warm, lived in. The collection wasn't curated for show, it was a reader's library, the kind that had grown over years of use, not as a decoration. I ran my fingers along the spines, feeling the weight of the stories contained within them. History, philosophy, poetry in multiple languages, each book seemed to offer a glimpse into a mind far more complex than the man I had met last night. Ryker was more than just a mafia boss. He was someone who saw the world in a way I couldn't begin to understand. I climbed the spiral staircase to the upper level, where a comfortable armchair sat beside a small desk. And on that desk, waiting for me like an invitation, was a book, a collection of Italian sonnets. It was old, the pages foxed with age, and when I opened it, it fell open to a specific page. The spine cracked from repeated use, revealing a single poem circled in faint pencil. My love is like a fever, longing still. I shut the book quickly, my heart doing an uncomfortable flip. This was a vulnerability, a crack in his armor. And I had no idea what to do with it.